to thank you for making some time to be with us this evening. We really value your input in this planning process, and we are thrilled that you are here. The agenda for our meeting tonight is as follows. We're going to start with an introductory message from the town. Then I will give a brief project overview. Then we're going to do a little quiz about inclusionary housing just to get a sense of how much you may already understand about inclusionary housing, and to take an opportunity to have some educational opportunities around that. And then we're going to get into sort of the nuts and bolts of inclusionary housing, and then ask you some questions so we can set a priority for this policy, which is really the purpose of our meeting tonight. We really want to hear from Ashland residents on what matters most and how we can draft an inclusionary housing bylaw that's right for Ashland. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brandy Kinsman for an introduction from the town.
Thank you, Alex. So I'm Brandy Kinsman. I just wanted to welcome you all to our Inclusionary Housing Public Forum on behalf of our steering committee, the planning department, and our partners at MAPC. I'd also like to thank WACA-TV for live streaming this tonight, and I know this will be recorded for playback as well. So as Alex had sort of mentioned, this is the second phase of the Housing Production Plan project that began last fall. We had put together a steering committee that consisted of myself, Tricia Kendall from the Planning Board, Steve Greenberg and David Rosenblum from the Affordable Housing Trust, and Ron Eskovitz from the Board of Health. And working with MAPC and our planning department, we had updated our housing production plan to really reflect our new goals for Ashland and its housing and the changes that have really happened over the past 5 years. So this part was completed last May and was certified by the state. So the housing production plan is really a tool, and it's really to help us identify ways to increase affordable housing in Ashland, with one of the main goals to have at least 10% affordable housing or subsidized housing inventory, as the state refers to it as. And one of the ways that we identify to increase affordable housing is to look at creating a town-wide inclusionary housing bylaw. And we have partnered with MAPC to take us through this whole process. And with your input, what we hope to do is to create a zoning bylaw that would require all future development in Ashland to have an affordable housing component. And the goal would be to eventually bring this bylaw to all residents of Ashland for our spring 2022 town meeting. So with that, I will turn that over to Alex Koppelman from MAPC to take us through tonight's agenda. Alex?
Thank you, Brandy. And I'm actually gonna just start here with a broad overview of the Ashland For All planning process. And just so you know, I'm a regional housing planner with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. MAPC is the regional planning agency for Greater Boston. We serve the 101 cities and towns in Greater Boston, providing technical assistance. We really emphasize smart growth and equity in our values as an organization. And we are assisting Ashland with drafting inclusionary housing bylaw. And as Brandy mentioned, we also assisted the town with the first part of this planning process, which was to update Ashland's housing production plan. So the housing production plan was completed over about a 10-month process with several opportunities for public input like this forum. And the boards voted unanimously to adopt that plan in May. And this is a great foundation for us to start thinking about an inclusionary housing policy as it lays out kind of a roadmap and several strategies for the town to consider in meeting its housing need over the next 5 years. As Brandy mentioned, this is a planning process that has been stewarded by a steering committee that was appointed by the town. The committee has offered their leadership by reaching out to their networks, provided an understanding of housing need with local knowledge, and also guided decision-making, and has been an advocate for this planning process several of the committee members are with us tonight, and so I just want to thank them for being here and for moving this process along. So as we approach an inclusionary housing bylaw, this is about a 6-month planning process that includes 3 steering committees, a public forum, which we're having tonight. And following this forum, we're going to take your input to help us shape some of the draft recommendations for an inclusionary housing bylaw. And then we're going to gain additional public input through a survey around the December-January period via the Ashland For All story map, which I'm going to share with you in a moment here, which will be a great place for you to go and get updates on the process and learn more about inclusionary housing. So we're actually going to get started tonight with a pop quiz about inclusionary housing, just to get a sense of how much you may know about inclusionary housing already. And also, this is an opportunity to learn more about inclusionary housing. So we're going to ask you some questions. Just do your best. If you don't get them right, that's totally fine. We don't expect you to, but this will be a nice interactive way for us to think about just the nuts and bolts of inclusionary housing, some of the basics here. So the first question here is going to pop up on your screen in a poll. I'll read it for you now, but Christian, you can go ahead and put that poll up. So the first question we have for you is, affordable housing is required by a deed restriction to cost no more than how much of a household's income? So go ahead and take a moment to take a crack at that question, and then we'll go over the answer. Okay, it looks like folks are almost done. A few more. Okay, take just about 3 more seconds. All right, great. Christian, can you end that poll and show us the results? All right, it looks like the majority of people went with B, 30% of a household's income, and that is correct. So great job, everybody. If you didn't get this one right, that's okay. So the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development really sets the standards for affordable housing, and generally speaking, those at 80% of area median income qualify. And once you live in an affordable housing unit, that unit must cost no more than 30% of your income. And this is really the standard. We want housing to cost no more than 30% of your income, because you have other necessities like food, healthcare, transportation that you need to take care of. So the answer there is 30%. All right, we're going to go on to the second question. So Christian, if you want to load that one up, and I'll read it here for everyone. So the second question is, true or false, an inclusionary housing zoning bylaw can produce affordable housing units with little to no public subsidy?
Alex, do you have the poll up? Are you seeing the poll?
I'm not.
It is giving me an error. Fail to start poll. Another poll has started. So I'm not sure. I don't know if I can launch this one, and I'm not quite sure why. Hold
okay,
on.
that's all right. Well, why don't you try and work on those polls, Christian? And for now, let's just ask everybody to put their answer in the chat. So question 2 here, true or false, inclusionary housing zoning bylaw can produce affordable housing units with little to no public subsidy? Throw your answer in the chat. All right, it looks like the majority of folks said that this is true, and that is the correct answer. So this is really a great tool to get some community benefits from development by having a developer provide a portion of new housing units as affordable. This can be done with little to no public subsidy, but I do want to note that you can use a public subsidy to say increase the level of affordability of those units. So maybe a little bit of a trick question here, but generally speaking, yes, this is true. So we'll go on to question 3, which is, how many cities and towns in Massachusetts have inclusionary housing zoning policies? So A, less than 30, and go ahead and put your answer in the chat. We could just say A, B, C, or D. A is less than 30, B 40 to 60, C 70 to 90, and D more than 100. All right, we got a lot of answers coming in. It looks like this is where we no longer agree. We have several different responses coming in. All right, just going to give you one more moment to put your answer in. All right, so we have several different answers here. I'd say maybe the top choice was B. The correct answer is actually more than 100 jurisdictions in Massachusetts have inclusionary housing policies. So this is a tool that several communities across the state and then even across the country, I believe there's just over about 1,000 municipalities across the country that have these policies. So it is a tool that has been used by several communities. All right, let's go on to question 4. Okay, so question 4, the area median income, which is the median income for Ashland and the metro area. How much is the area median income? So go ahead and throw your answer in the chat, A, B, C, or D. Some answers coming in. All right. Just a few more moments to put in that last second in. No Googling, by the way. That's cheating. All right. The answer is $120,800. That is the area median income for Ashland and the greater Boston region. And just so you know, the median household income for Ashland is actually a little bit more than that. So the median income in Ashland is relatively greater just by a little bit than the area median income. And so these are good terms to know because there's things that we're going to need to be able to talk about as we move through this conversation. So just have 3 more questions for you. Question 5, typically households considered by HUD to be low income are eligible to live in affordable housing. How high of an income could a single person household in Ashland have and still be eligible for affordable housing? So go ahead and throw your answer in the chat and then we'll go over it. All right, got lots of answers coming in. Take 10 more seconds. All right, are we ready? So this is one that really often surprises people in terms of how high it is. So as I was saying earlier, if you make 80% of the area median income, generally you're going to be eligible for affordable housing. This figure varies by household size, but for a single person household, it's $75,750. And that often is surprising in terms of how high that can be. So I think we just need to keep in mind that greater Boston is a very costly place to live and median incomes are high here. And so you can have a relatively high income and still be eligible for affordable housing. It just shows you that the market is not always creating housing that's accessible for everyone here. All right, so second last question here, question 6. And it looks like we have our polls back, so you can answer this one by the poll. Question 6, how many households in Ashland are eligible to live in affordable housing? So you got your options there. Go ahead and answer this one in the poll. Got our responses coming in. Like most people have answered. A few more questions coming in. I'll give you 5 more seconds. All right, let's close that. Christian, do you want to show us the results of that poll? All right, so it looks like this one was kind of split across the board, but if you answered D, 1,885 households, you are correct. That is how many households in Ashland are eligible to live in affordable housing. And so this graph here just gives you a little more detail about that. This is about 29% of households in town. And then here, this shows the actual income levels of those who are eligible. So the lightest shade here is those making 80% of the area median income, which we were just discussing. But you can see there's folks here who are making between 30 and 50% area median income and less than 30% of the area median income, which is considered very low income and extremely low income. And together, those households make up over 60% of households in town. So these are the kinds of things we want to be thinking about as we're looking at an inclusionary housing policy. And then our final question here for you. How many housing units are on the town subsidized housing inventory? So this is the last one. If you go ahead and answer this one through the poll, and then we'll go over it. All right, we'll give folks just about 10 more seconds on this one. All right, finish that thought. Okay, great. And Christian, you want to close that and show us the results? All right, looks like the majority of folks have gone with A or B. If you said A, 415 units, you are correct. This is based on the latest numbers from the Department of Housing and Community Development. We have, as we saw before, 1,885 households in town that are eligible for affordable housing, and there's 415 housing units on the town subsidized housing inventory. So, you know, this really shows that we do need more affordable units and that need is there in town. So if you were, you know, curious about any of this, if you didn't do so well, that's okay. This is really our chance to think about this and to learn about this. And if you want to do some more exploring on your own, I really encourage you to check out the Ashland For All story map. I'm going to post a link in the chat to that right now. So I just posted a link in the chat. This is a story map. It has all the information that we gathered during the housing production plan process, has a lot of these terms that we were going over here, and a whole bunch of data. There's also a link to download the full housing production plan if you want to check that out. But I really encourage you to go here. And then when we come later with a survey to gather more input on inclusionary housing, we're going to be posting it to the story map. So we want to really encourage you to explore this tool. It has all kinds of great information. So with that, I'm now just going to give a brief recap of the housing production plan and some of the things that we should be keeping in mind as we craft this inclusionary housing policy. So there were 5 goals as a part of the housing production plan. The first, provide and preserve housing for all incomes and ages. The second, to adopt inclusionary zoning that facilitates development of diverse housing types and affordable housing. The third, to affirmatively further fair housing. The fourth, to promote sustainability by harmonizing housing needs with walkability, access to open space, transit, clean energy opportunities. And then goal 5, to build community awareness and support to take the action necessary to address housing needs in town. So developing inclusionary housing bylaw pretty much checks off all 5 of these goals. And it was one of the first priority strategy recommendations in the plan. I do just want to show you here that there's the 5 goals that we just went over. There's 10 priority strategies. Inclusionary housing is just one of these strategies. So there are several tools that we can use to address housing need. Inclusionary housing is one of them. It's not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve all of your housing challenges, but it is a very good tool. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on tonight. But then I just want to show you lastly, the housing production plan also identified different types of area of development opportunities based on geographic location, parcel size, and other conditions that show suitable housing development. And then we recommended corresponding housing types that would make sense in those different areas. But just to give you a sense here, when we're talking about inclusionary housing and requiring a certain percent of housing units in a new development to be affordable, this could come in a variety of different ways. It could be in a small multifamily building. It could be in a mixed use building where the housing is above retail. So, rather than a big, large affordable housing development, inclusionary housing really spreads affordable units around, and it can be produced in a variety of different housing formats. So I hope this gives you a good foundation for our discussion tonight. And I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Alexis Smith, here in a moment, who's going to go over the nuts and bolts of inclusionary housing and really get into the components of that policy. If you have any questions along the way, please put them in the chat and we will get to you throughout the meeting. But with that, I'm going to pass it over to Alexis.
All right, hi everyone. Great to see you all, and thanks for being here tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the basics of inclusionary zoning, what it is, and what it can do, and then I'm going to get into a little bit more detail about how it works, which is important to understand, so that we can, so that everyone's making informed decisions as they think about what they want the priorities for their policy to be. So jumping right in. Oh, and I should introduce myself. I'm Alexis Smith. I'm a principal planner with MAPC, and it's great to see you all. Inclusionary housing is a municipal level policy that requires a certain percentage of units in all new housing development to be affordable. It's most commonly expressed as a percentage of units, but there are some other ways to do it. One of the single most important facts that you can know about, that you can understand about inclusionary housing is that it relies on private developers to create affordable housing. And in this country, for better or worse, housing is a business, just like any other business, just like a restaurant, just like a corner store down the street. And so these developers who are building housing, can only, well, we can ask them to do, the town can ask them to provide some public benefit. There is a limit to the amount of public benefit, or AKA affordability, that they can provide, before it starts to become too burdensome, excuse me. And so because of that, a good inclusionary policy will balance all the different elements of a policy to both maximize public benefit, so get as much affordability as possible while not dampening development. So walking a really fine razor line between those two ends of the spectrum. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about all the different things that the town will be considering while they're, deciding, while y'all are deciding how to prioritize, how to, handle your inclusionary policy. The first is the number of affordable units that would be required. This is most commonly somewhere between 10 and 15% of new units. 12% is very common, 15% is very common. And so that's that directly impacts the number of units, affordable units that are built relative to overall housing. And that's an important number as well, because I know, many towns are concerned about maintaining numbers on the state subsidized housing inventory. And so keeping at least this percentage will enable the town to keep up with, continue adding affordable units as it adds market rate units as well. The second key piece, which is very closely related to the number of affordable units, is the income target. As Alex mentioned before, low income is a very, very big bucket. It can include folks who are considered extremely low income. So folks earning a minimum wage, folks working in food service, perhaps seniors on Social Security, all the way up to, in some cases, surprisingly high incomes, but folks who are still, probably not able to afford housing that meets their needs on the market. So that could be firemen, it could be teachers, it covers a very wide range of incomes. Because inclusionary housing is primarily market-based, again, relying on that private development, most inclusionary policies, I shouldn't say the best, most inclusionary policies serve the higher end of that low income spectrum, still low income, but they're not serving somebody who's earning minimum wage. They're serving someone who's, making a decent salary, but just simply can't afford any housing that's available on the open market. These two are very closely related. We're going to talk about balancing a little bit more, but typically, if a town asks for a higher number of units, then they also have to balance that by asking for a higher level of affordability. If a priority is to achieve really deep affordability for those lower income residents, then typically that means that they can ask for fewer units. There are ways to balance this and to provide resources to get deeper affordability, but that's a good general rule of thumb. Another way that the third kind of balancing act in the triangle is incentives, which help offset the costs of providing affordability, particularly if the town wants to really emphasize more units or deeper affordability. This can take many different forms. Some common ones are providing, allowing the developer to build more units than would otherwise have been allowed. Sometimes that comes along with a height increase. They can involve reduced permitting fees. Sometimes if housing is within a certain distance of transit or a commuter rail, it can involve reduced parking. We'll get into these a little bit more later, but there's a lot of tools that towns can pull in creatively to really try to push the affordability as far as they can, if that's a goal. The next piece that we're going to ask you to think about is in lieu payments. This is common in many towns where instead of building affordable units in the building as part of the housing development, the town may allow developers instead to pay a fee, and then the town uses that fee for housing purposes. There's pluses and minuses to that. If towns have a really robust housing trust or have a lot of activities and programs that they're excited about, then having that income stream can be beneficial. But if they don't have any a good use for those funds, then sometimes it tends to sit there and it results in not a lot happening either way. And certainly it's most cost effective for the developer to build the housing units as part of their project because they're leveraging all of the building that's already there and happening. The fifth piece that we're going to ask you to think about is similar to in lieu payments, but location alternatives. This is another common element of many policies where a town may allow a developer to still build the required affordable units, but perhaps build them in a separate location. Maybe in partnership with a nonprofit developer, maybe they just have a small piece of land that would be, serve that purpose well. The plus of that is that it allows developers more flexibility, which means that you can push the affordability envelope a little more. The downside of that is that there can be an equity component to that, particularly if the market rate development is in a really prime location, near shopping or near the commuter rail, and the offsite units are further away. You get into the questions of, well, don't the affordable units deserve to be in a location with many amenities as well? So there are no right answers to any of these. All of these are just things that you all in the town are going to be considering as we move forward with drafting this policy. So moving on to the next slide.
Just Alexis, really quick, Catherine has a question. She asked, shouldn't we figure out a way to help the lowest end of the low income first?
Yes, that gets into what Alex was saying before about this not necessarily being the be all end all. Inclusionary housing solves a lot. It is the answer to many needs, but it cannot be the answer to all needs. So if serving the neediest populations end up rising to the top as a high priority for the town, then we can design a policy that perhaps uses in lieu payment to work with a nonprofit developer to build those real deeply affordable units, or works. There's a lot of ways we could approach that if that ends up being a priority, but the trade-off is that because those units require so much resources, then there's fewer units that can be built. Again, it's just a question of what the right tools are to address different need. Typically, housing authorities or Section 8 vouchers or all sorts of housing vouchers are really well suited to deal with those deep needs. Whereas market-based tools like linkage fees or inclusionary zoning are best suited to deal with that higher end of the low income spectrum. But that's not a steadfast rule, and a lot of it will just depend on what rises to the top for as the town's priorities.
Thanks, Alexis. We're just one more question before we move on. Rob asked, in terms of incentives, what is the possibility of state or federal aid rather than offering density or other local subsidies?
That one is tricky. Certainly, I don't want to make definite pronouncements on the on what the federal aid outlook is right now, given all of the the funding that may potentially be coming through, depending on what bills pass in Congress. But generally, it's very difficult to write a mandatory local policy that is dependent on resources coming from resources that the town doesn't have any control over. The town we could consider something that encourages folks to use whatever the federal funds might be that are coming in to achieve deeper affordability. The town could decide to use those resources to buy down affordability in of the inclusionary housing units, which is one thing we'll talk about. But to just say you are required to build, to use federal funds to build this deeper affordability into your project is tough, because then if the federal fund runs out and the bylaw is still on the town's books, then you get into kind of a sticky situation. So I'm giving a lot of hedging answers. The answer to a lot of questions on this is, we can craft a policy that, emphasizes different pieces and different components depending on what the town's priorities are, but there's always trade-offs. So, you know, if the town just says we're really not interested in a density bonus, we only want to rely on state or federal subsidy to achieve deeper affordability, then that's totally fine. That's the, you know, the town's choice, but it means that perhaps the ask, the affordability ask is a little less in exchange.
All right, thank you. And I know others have left comments and we appreciate that. I want you to know we will be downloading the chat. So your comments are definitely welcome and helpful. So we're going to move here to some of the mechanics of inclusionary housing. Alexis, you want to continue?
Yeah. So this is just kind of a run through of housing development economics 101 to help you understand why this emphasis on balancing components and on you know, incentives or whatever else is so critical. So in any development, market rate, entirely affordable, mixed income, in this area at this time, it is very expensive to build. Typically in Greater Boston, a 1-bedroom unit can cost, you know, $350,000 to $400,000 to, you know, all development costs in, which means that, you know, unfortunately, that's kind of a hard baseline in terms of costs. And I'm showing this pie chart because unfortunately, the vast majority of the costs that go into the overall housing cost are things that neither the town nor the developer has a ton of control over. You know, especially I'm sure if you've been reading the news, you've been seeing all this stuff about supply chain. You know, a pallet of wood costs what a pallet of wood costs. And there's not a lot to getting around that. Of course, there's choices that you can make in terms of finishes, but construction costs are, you know, there's only so low they can go. Same with land prices, same with financing costs. Those are dictated by the bank. Soft costs, which are things like architecture fees, all of these go into the mix. And while certainly, you know, the town can make, requests or the developer can try to negotiate, there's only so much control that most folks have, or that a developer or the town has over, well, the costs that go into housing. You can see that, you know, the developer fee, which at the project startup goes to cover their staffing costs and a little bit of overhead. You know, that's only typically 7% of the project. So it's not quite as high as some people expect. Moving on. So some of the things that go into project costs. I'm going to start at the bottom of this and look at the financing piece. Any project, just like when you buy a house and you get a mortgage, also be seeking financing from a bank, a loan from a bank to cover the cost that the bank won't cover. They make up by seeking equity from investors, and so those kind of make their way into the financing costs, because over the life of the project, it then has to pay back the loan in the same way that you make monthly payments on a mortgage. Looking at the top half of that house, there's a lot of things that a project has to pay for. Management, just keeping the building, staffing and keeping the building running. Maintenance, you know, snow plowing costs money, you know, fixing a leaky roof costs money. Property taxes are a big one. Keeping the lights on in the hallways, insurance and reserves. All of these are things that a project has to pay for. And so then moving to the next slide, the things that pay for that cover those costs are the project income. And this mostly includes rents. That's certainly the biggest bulk of project income, but there's also, you know, if a project charges for parking, there's a little bit coming in there, or perhaps if there's, you know, laundry on site or pet fees, there might be some additional income, but the majority is rent. And the point that I want to make here is that the rents aren't going directly into a developer's pocket. There's a lot of other things that have to get covered before, you know, just as part of the project's bottom line. And this income must be enough to cover all those project costs, or the project isn't feasible. Again, just in the same way that your personal income has to be enough to cover your mortgage cost and, you know, and your electricity bill and all of those things. So when a developer is planning a project, they anticipate all of these things in far, far greater detail than the simplified version I'm showing here. And if they think that the amount of income that the project will generate from rents is greater than the amount of than the costs that the project will have to pay, so the maintenance, the repaying the bank loan, all of that stuff, then they say that this project is feasible and it's likely to move forward. The more the project income is greater than the project costs, the more likely a project is to move forward, because the developer thinks it's a good deal. So next slide, please. So let's think about adding affordability into this. In a 100% market rate project income is coming from market rents, and it's whatever a developer will plan on it being. Once a town asks a developer to include some affordability in the project, the affordable units are still bringing in rent. They're not free, certainly, but because the rents are limited to be affordable to match with low income incomes, the amount that those affordable units are bringing in is the rents that they're paying are far less than the market rate rents, and so that's a decrease in project income. Now, many projects can absorb a decrease in income. There's a cushion, there's wiggle room. Many projects can just handle a little bit of affordability. But if project starts adding greater and greater affordability, again, those affordable units are still bringing in rent, but as the affordable units make up a greater share of the overall project, the amount of income that's coming into the project continues to shrink. And that's why when we talk about all entirely affordable buildings, those projects need a lot of government subsidy, because the affordable rents just are not covering the project costs. And so when we look at adding more and more and more affordability, at some point when that project income becomes less, if you can flip to the next slide, Alex, becomes less than the project costs, then all of a sudden the project isn't feasible. And again, just comparing it to your own finances, if at some point your income becomes less than all of the bills that you owe, then that's, then you're in the red. And the same thing is true for a project. And so there's only so much affordability that we can ask for without providing incentives. So moving on to the next slide, let's talk about how to get some greater affordability, since I know there are folks here who are interested in that. One thing we can do is increase project income. That could be in the form of a density bonus, so adding additional market rate units, and the rent from those additional market units helps cross-subsidize the lower rents from the affordable units. Another thing that's less common, but that is certainly doable, is to subsidize deeper affordability. There are some towns who use funding to say, all right, developer, you are on the hook for providing units at 80% AMI, say, which is the higher end of the low income spectrum, but we are going to put additional money into the pot so that those units are actually affordable to a much lower income family. So that's an interesting way to do that I hope sees some more traction now that there's some big federal dollars coming in. So if you go to the next slide, you can just see how that plays out. Again, the amount of income coming in is still the same. There's still a decrease in income from the affordable rents, but you're adding additional paths for project income so that income can once again be greater than project costs. If you go back to the previous slide, actually. So we just talked about income. The other increase in income, the flip side of that that you can do is reduce project costs. These could either be upfront costs that come when the project is being construction. So again, saying, if you're near the commuter rail station, you don't have to build as much parking. Parking is very expensive. It costs about $20,000 a space. And those costs are passed on to the residents. And so if less parking is required, then that's a way to reduce costs. Permitting fee waiver is another way to reduce costs. Other ongoing, and yeah, we can go to the next one. or the cost reduction could come in the form of more of an ongoing reduction. So say a property tax reduction. Some that's starting to get more interest nationally because property tax relief is a really powerful way. It can be a very powerful way to get deeper affordability. So all of those things are, what's in the mix. Again, reducing the project costs means that even if the income is lower, now the costs are also lower. So once again, the income is greater than the costs. All that is to say, there's a lot of different things going into this. One of the things that we are going to be doing as part of this project is we're in the middle of this right now is a detailed financial analysis to really get to the bottom of understanding, okay, what is the local market in Ashland? What do things look like in town here, not in the region, but in town? And what do we think development here specifically can handle? And what do we think the most powerful incentives might be? So this is certainly not there's going to be a lot more study going into this, but what we hear from you after I stop talking in 1 minute is going to help us understand what your priorities are and what we should be researching and helping the town understand to set as priorities. So with that, I'm going to stop for a moment. I've been seeing the chat going on. Are there questions or discussion points we should visit?
I can point out a couple for you. First is the bylaw, will it apply to rental housing units and for sale housing units?
Yes, thank you. That was a good question. I should have said that up front. It's up to the town. Typically, yes, it would apply to both. Some municipalities distinguish between the two because affordable ownership units are a lot harder to make work than affordable rental units. And so they might allow for a higher percentage AMI for home ownership units than for rental units. But the short answer is yes, it would typically apply to both.
Okay, thank you. And we also have another participant that's interested in how linkage fees and impact fees work, and could they possibly be an alternative to traditional inclusionary housing program?
Yes, a linkage. I'll deal with an impact fee first. To my great chagrin, if we're being entirely honest, impact fees, formally are not allowed in Massachusetts. So that would be where we would say, all right, developer, you're building a new housing. We anticipate that you are going to have this much impact on our roads or this much impact on housing. So we'll require a fee to cover those impacts. That, as such is not permitted under Massachusetts state law. What is permitted is a linkage fee, which is focused on commercial development. So that essentially says, all right, commercial, developer, big store coming in, you are going to bring, this many more folks who are excited about your store and might want to live in town. You're going to have this many more workers who are earning whatever wage you're paying, who may not be able to afford to otherwise live in town. We're going to ask you to pay, a fee to cover housing programs. So in Massachusetts, essentially a linkage fee would target commercial development, and inclusionary housing would target residential development.
Great. Catherine asked, the chart had a 7% fee for developers, but that did not include profit. Where does profit come in on that?
Oh, I should have mentioned this and I didn't, because you're catching all of my oversights. So if we go back to one of the slides that compares the orange income house to the blue cost house, or if one of the ones where the income is actually larger. Profit is the difference between the income and the costs. So after a developer has paid all of the project costs off, that bit on the top that's left over is what the developer takes in profit and or what the investors take in return. So the project income does include profit for sure, but it is not that doesn't in its entirety is not alone what the developer profit is.
Okay, and we have some other good comments, and we appreciate those. And again, this is very helpful for us as we continue to navigate through this process. But to get to our next section here, we have some polling that we'd like to do with you to gather what you believe should be a priority for this bylaw. So Christian, if you want to go ahead and launch the first set of questions, that would be great.
All right, so, oh, sorry, Alex.
Oh, no, you can go ahead, Alex. I was just going to mention there's several questions, so all you need to do is scroll down.
Okay, yeah, so as Alex said, this is, what we'd like to get an understanding from you of how, who inclusionary, these inclusionary housing policies should support, what you're hoping it will accomplish, big picture goals here. And just so you know, after we talk about the big picture with this set of 4 questions, we have some more poll questions that talk about the specifics that I just got into, and so we'll be asking for your thoughts on those as well. All right, I'll give it a few more minutes. The answers are still coming in, and since there's a couple questions, it might take a few moments. All right, let's have folks finish up the last answers and give it a few more seconds. All right, let's, Christian, do you want to close that out, please? All right. So looking at just kind of running through these answers that are your responses quickly, it looks like there's a pretty even mix of how folks would prioritize inclusionary housing that supports folks who work in town. From a fifth of folks saying it's not important at all, up to a fifth of folks saying it's extremely important, and the slight majority saying that it's very important. So again, all things that will be taken into account and guiding the town as it considers priorities. Inclusionary housing should support those with the lowest income. So this is something that we already spoke a bit about. That looks like it's important to the exactly half of folks in the room, and then very or extremely important to many more folks. Inclusionary housing should support affordable housing for families. Oh, this is a winner with it being important to extremely important. And there are things that we can build into a policy to encourage developers to provide, to have the affordable units that they provide be larger size units for families. And lastly, inclusionary housing should support seniors and single person households. Again, it kind of even range from important to extremely important. So it's, when we're thinking about the people who are going to be living in this, it sounds like that's of high importance to many folks in the room. So let's see, I think we can close that out, and then we are going to move on to another poll to ask priorities.
Alexis, before we do that, could we take a couple questions?
Oh yeah, of course.
Okay, so Catherine asked, do developers expose profit in the pro forma? Can inclusionary zoning put limits on profit?
That's very difficult for a town to do. Developers tend to keep that pretty tight to the, they tend to keep pretty mum on their pro formas. The town, the town can ask for it, especially for larger projects that are going to be doing impact studies. There are vehicles through which to do it. Massachusetts has a state law called Chapter 40B, which I think many of you are probably familiar with. It allows developers to bypass certain local zoning regulations if the development has a certain amount of affordability in it. And and there are caps on developer profit in those projects. So there are ways to do it, but it can get complicated. I guess the short answer is something for us to research and come back with a more fleshed out answer on.
Thanks, Alexis. And then we're getting a few questions about just economic feasibility. Can you just tell us a little bit more about the pro forma financial feasibility analysis that you're doing and how you're utilizing local data and interviews with developers?
Yes, the big smile is because I really enjoy working on these pro formas. What we'll be doing in the, as we're working on this analysis is pulling together a pretty detailed spreadsheet that will account for, all of the things that, that were very simplified up here. We'll have in far greater detail, in specific to Ashland. So we will be looking at how big the units typically are. Are folks building detached homes or apartment building or, multifamily buildings? What size units are developers building? Mostly 1 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms? How much are they charging for rent? How much are construction costs in Ashland? Are there any other factors that go into costs in Ashland? And to understand what all of these numbers are, we are interviewing many locally active development professionals. So developers who have developed in Ashland or who are considering it or who are have experience developing in nearby. We'll be talking with lenders and banks to really make sure we understand what the financing costs are to develop a housing project in town. Property managers and realtors, and just making sure that we have very, very locally specific data. We will also supplement that with industry data. There's a lot of data that you can pay for that gets into details about rents and square footage and all those things. MAPC also tracks rents and postings for housing, and so we'll take all of that, both the hard numbers from the data sources and the more squishy numbers from the interviews and from folks who are locally active, and kind of synthesize that into an analysis that will say, all right, what's kind of a baseline for a development project that's feasible in Ashland? We'll consider rental and ownership housing, and we'll consider projects of many different sizes, and then we'll take all of those and say, all right, well, how much affordability can this sample project bear? And we'll you put different affordability inputs in as well, and all of that will end up helping us kind of come up with a list of different options that could work in Ashland for an inclusionary policy.
Okay, thank you. And there are several comments here too. We appreciate those. And again, we'll be reviewing all of the comments after the forum to really help us think about the priorities for this policy. With that, I'm gonna ask us to go into the next poll. And Christian, if you want to go ahead and launch that, and Alexis, you want to go ahead and walk us through that.
So where the previous poll asked kind of your high level priorities, in this poll, in this set of questions, I'm going to ask you about your specific priorities. And this is where we're going to get in some of the pieces that I spoke about previously in terms of the specific policy elements. There's 5 questions here. I'll just kind of walk you through them, but obviously feel free to skim ahead and answer as you answer as you go along. The first, is getting at that question of balance. Given that most policies will policies that emphasize deeply affordable units to lower income residents tend to need to ask for fewer units overall, and vice versa. Policies that ask for kind of a high number of units tend to also have a higher number of a higher level of affordability, still low income, but higher. It's asking you which one you would rather see the town emphasize, that more units or deeper affordability, essentially. The second question is kind of getting at that same same issue. If maintaining a percentage of units on the state subsidized housing inventory is important, then that might, the town might be more inclined to, focus on more units. And the state subsidized housing inventory is that state goal that all towns have at least 10% of their housing be registered as affordable. And I won't get into the deep details of that, but it's if it's highly important to the town to maintain that minimum threshold of units, then that's another priority that we'll take into consideration. Question 3. This is, essentially, would you all support additional market rate units in the form of a density bonus or other mechanism if that meant that the town could ask for more affordable units or deeper affordability? Again, it's all about trade-offs. The more that the town is able to offer and put on the table, the more that the town is able to ask for from developers. Should the town explore using various funding sources to subsidize deeper deeper levels? This is kind of what I was referencing before, where some towns have used resources to buy down affordability. So even if the developer can only provide the higher end of the low income spectrum, the towns can supplement that. So we're starting to get at those needier households. And finally, question 5, should the policy allow homes to be in a different location? So this is getting at that question of, allow developers a little more flexibility, which means you could perhaps push for a little more affordability, or is it very important that the affordable units be integrated with the market rate units? I think I'm gonna give you another few moments to answer that, since these questions were long. While folks are answering, were there anything else in the chat that popped up that we should visit?
We have a question from Anna. Will you consider economic feasibility of inclusionary requirements for 15 to 40% of new residential units?
We certainly will. We will explore options above 15%. Without having done the analysis, 40% is going there. I am not aware of a single policy in the country that asks for affordability that's that high. Ashland would certainly be a leader in that case. We'll be exploring a whole range of options. And again, if we hear from you all and from the town that, really pushing the envelope on the number of affordable units is a high priority, we will explore ways to do that. But the financial piece usually ends up meaning that even in like the most robust, housing markets where towns are, or cities and towns are asking for like deep affordability, it's usually not higher than 20 or 25%. So we'll study it, but I want to set expectations appropriately. I think let's see. Let's go ahead and close the poll. It looks like most people have participated. Let's see. So just kind of going through this, pretty even split in terms of prioritizing the number of affordable units versus deeper affordability that reaches needier families. We are absolutely going to study many variations on both of those, and we'll have different options, to consider. In maintaining the state subsidized housing inventory percentage, kind of a pretty even split between not important at all and very important. So that's an interesting one. Again, this is certainly something we'll take into consideration and study. More utilizing more market rate units in a development to subsidize the affordable units. sounds like a lot of folks aren't really interested in that. A lot of hard no's and, a fair number of maybes. So one of the things we'll be doing is looking into what that actually looks like. Does it mean just a couple extra, some extra units? Doesn't, how would that impact the building? What the building form looks like. And so we'll be taking a much deeper dive into that one. Using resources to reach deeper levels of affordability. Strong majority are to support that. So that's certainly something we'll consider. And again, hopefully there'll be some federal funds coming in, or the federal funds that we know are coming in will be able to perhaps be put to use for that. And let's see more, should the policy allow homes to be built in different locations? Strong majority, maybe. So it sounds like there's some more, more study we have to do and more, education we have to do on the implications of that. So that's, let's see, that was I believe that's the end of the poll. So I'm going to, let's see, we've got the results here, and I'm going to turn it back over to Alex.
All right, thanks, Alexis. And we're getting close to the conclusion of our meeting here, and we've got a lot of great input from you tonight, both in the polls and in the chat, and we really do appreciate that to get a sense of what you feel is most important in this bylaw, and also just the areas that may be a little bit difficult to understand. This is very technical kind of work, but this is really helpful for us in terms of thinking about what kind of information is going to be most helpful to put out there on this. I really would encourage everyone to check out the Ashland For All story map. Christian, if you could drop that link in there again, that'd be great. But a lot of the questions and comments that are coming in really are addressed in the housing production plan or on that story map. So I would really encourage you to go there for further information. And as I mentioned before, we're going to be doing a survey once the draft recommendations have been made, and that will be posted on the story map as well. So we've got a lot of great input from you tonight, and we just want to close here by learning a little bit more about you, so we can just have a better understanding of who was in the room tonight and who was offering that input. So Christian, if you could go ahead and launch the participant poll. We just have a few questions for you, just so that we can have a better understanding of who was in the room tonight. Some of these questions, you may choose to answer, you may choose not to, but we do appreciate your input, and we just want to understand a little bit more about who's in the room. Kirsten, you want to launch the poll, please?
While y'all are answering that, I'm seeing some questions pop up. There was a question about how long the units would be required to be affordable. That is entirely up to the town and is something that would get written into the bylaw. The trend right now is to say in perpetuity. So the units would be required to be affordable for the life of the building.
All right, just gonna give folks a few more seconds to finish up the poll here. And then we're going to close. If you have more questions about this planning process, please feel free to reach out to us. This is the beginning of the conversation, but we want to stay engaged with you. So please do get in touch with us. You can contact the town planner, Peter, or you can send myself an email. And then again, please do visit the Ashland For All story map as we plan to continue to update that story map with new information about inclusionary housing. And we will be posting draft inclusionary housing recommendations on there when they're prepared. So please do expect a survey to come out in December or January. Rob asked, will the story map be on the town's website? I'm not sure if it's on the town's website right now, but we will definitely make sure that it is. But again, we appreciate all of your comments and input tonight. We know this is a technical policy, so it may be kind of challenging to go through all the nuts and bolts, but I think everyone did a great job. And if there is more information that you need, please feel free to contact us. We really appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you.